It was the 1970s. I was in my early 20s and in the Navy, stationed at Pearl Harbor. I was downtown walking about by myself, as I tended to do, being the loner that I was accustomed to being. I wandered into a bookstore. It contained a few black history books, not many, but a few. One of them was entitled A Pictorial History About Black People, which I liked because it was mostly pictures, less to read. Inside of it, I happened to cross a picture of this black man dressed in some sort of military garb, with a funny-looking hat on his head. I assumed he must have been a king or something of one of the African nations. In the caption below it, it said something about that he was a principal black leader, not in Africa, but here in the United States, spearheading some sort of Back to Africa movement. He was not a king at all, but he decked himself out as if he was a kind of emperor or something. I looked at that picture and thought to myself, what a clown! Because up until that point, I had been used to seeing noted black American leaders who were mainstream. You know, the kind which wore suits and ties, looking all dignified. Never before had I seen anything which was openly as ostentatious or eccentric. His name was Marcus Garvey. I recall that time seeing a picture of him and finding out about him for the first time. Close to 10 years later was when I returned home to Philadelphia to live. I accompanied my brother Brett to a small show inside what seemed like a second-story row house on Columbia Avenue, which has since changed its name to Cecil Moore Avenue. Brett's wife at the time was doing a short dance number at this show inside this tiny theater. After it was over, there were some acknowledgments given to the show's organizers, who said they represented the local branch of the U.N.I.A. And boy, the praise that they heaped upon Marcus Garvey. I mean, by then, the guy had been dead for over 50 years. Yet the way they talked about him, it was as if he was still around. It astounded me that that fat, dark-skinned guy in the picture with the funny-looking hat on his head still had a loyal following around even after all these years. Marcus Garvey was born in Jamaica. As a young man, he immigrated to the United States. Sometime thereafter, he began his movement, which was the U.N.I.A. It stood for the United Negro Improvement Association. Its peak of prominence was in the 1920s, when it became large and widespread throughout the United States. The father of Malcolm X had even become a Garveyite, as members of his flock were commonly referred to as. I'm not going to bother going into a whole lot of detail about him. There's a lot of it available all over the internet for interested persons to look up on their own. His movement did not last much longer than 10 years. He surrounded himself with a lot of yes-men cronies. Eventually, he attracted the attention of the Internal Revenue Service and the FBI. They got him on a wide variety of charges, ranging from income tax evasion to wire fraud and the Black Star Liner stock shares he was peddling. He was found guilty in federal court and thrown into prison to serve a lengthy sentence. Before serving his full sentence, he was pardoned by, I believe it was the President of the United States, on the condition that upon his release, he was to be immediately deported from the United States back to Jamaica. He eventually settled in London, where he died majoritarily a forgotten man. However, pockets of his movement in the States carried on without him because of what he stood for and what he tried doing. Like I said, the dad of Malcolm X became a disciple who ended up murdered by the Klan because of it, as well as the small show I saw in the early 80s on Columbia Avenue. Although there exists a lot of information about him online, the majority of it is fragmented. What you will find is a little bit here, a little bit there. There is nothing resembling a kind of comprehensive biography anywhere on the internet, mostly due to the same reasons I had in my first impressions when I looked at that picture of him in that bookstore in the 70s, that he was eccentric and ostentatious and frankly somewhat of a clown. Most historians prefer to speak of him, if at all, as being somewhere out there on the fringes, anything but mainstream. Everyone knows who Martin King is. He has a federal holiday named in his honor. Most even recognize the name of Malcolm X. But ask anyone about Marcus Garvey, their response would be, Marcus who? I have no idea who you're talking about. Out of all the black leaders which have ever existed, I believe I identify the most with Marcus Garvey, which does not diminish any of the others. They all had their positive contributions, but Garvey is the only one of them I have the most trouble in finding things to disagree about in something he said or did. I have to go back to it again, but I believe I read somewhere that our nation colors originated from him, which I was inspired to use in my logo of the company I am forming. It is why in one of my previous book review clips on Booker Washington, I referred to myself as a militant the way I did. As a precursor to my business plan, you can consider this clip as a preview of it, to know a bit more about me, my thoughts and feelings as I move forward with putting it all together. That its underlying theme is based on nationalism, which I don't consider it to be a fad, the same way in which certain elements of our culture come and go, and change with whichever direction the wind blows. Nationalism digs down deep into the core of who you are as a person. It is not anything which can be faked or pretended. Either you have it or you don't. Simple as that. When you wear it, it makes you stand tall. You are never less than or trying to measure up to someone else's opinion of you. You carry it wherever you go.